Hello and welcome to Byju's IAS. Let's take up the analysis of today's The Hindu newspaper by looking at a column from page number 6 of the Delhi edition. This column deals with the topic of carbon neutrality, and the writers are calling upon India to not get pushed by the developed countries and the global civil society towards a carbon neutrality target because India will have to stay focused on its developmental needs and as well as on its aspirational goals. See, carbon neutrality is about achieving net zero emissions of greenhouse gases by striking a balance between emissions and removal. That is, by reducing emissions with a switch to clean and renewable forms of energy, and by removing the existing greenhouse gases in the atmosphere through sequestration. Around the world, several developed countries, especially European countries and the United States, they have been pushing their respective economies towards a carbon neutral target. And through their respective policies and laws, they are planning to achieve a carbon neutral status somewhere around the mid of this century. These carbon neutral plans of the developed countries is also being backed by the international civil society in order to speed up the global efforts towards climate action. This pursuit of a carbon neutral target within a prescribed deadline by the developed countries is putting pressure on the developing countries such as India and even the global civil society with the backing of their respective governments. They are pushing countries such as India to adopt a similar specific target for achieving carbon neutrality. And in this context, the writers have a word of caution for India. See, as you might know, the Paris Agreement of the Climate Change Convention has set a target of limiting the global rise in temperature to under 2 degrees Celsius and, if possible, to keep it under 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre industrial levels by the end of this century. And this target has been specified under Article 2 of the Paris Accord. As a follow up to this target, Article 4.1 of the Paris Agreement states that in order to achieve these long term temperature targets, the entire world should work towards achieving global peaking of emissions as soon as possible. And it recognizes that developing countries in particular will take a longer time to achieve their emissions peak. Following this global peaking of emissions, it calls upon the countries to undertake rapid reductions thereafter by adopting the cleanest technology that is available so as to achieve a balance between anthropogenic emissions by sources and the removal of these emissions by sinks of greenhouse gases. While specifying this ambition, Article 4.1 lays immense stress on the principle of equity by taking into account the development needs of the developing countries. Now, this is where you need to understand how the implementation of climate action goals can hamper the development of a country. See, if a particular country has to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by switching to cleaner and renewable forms of technology, then it will have to incur heavy expenses as these technologies are very expensive. Then even removal technologies such as sequestration is very cost prohibitive, and any such enforced targets on a country will drain its economic resources and thereby hamper its progress towards development. But however, considering the needs of the environment and sustainability, it is vital for every country to strive towards these climate action goals. But at the same time, every country need not contribute to the same extent. This is because of the concept of historical emissions. Because while developed countries have exhausted their carbon budget, the developing countries are yet to exploit their carbon budget, and hence there should be a greater responsibility on the developed nations. These developed nations have become developed countries in the first place because they were able to freely burn fossil fuels for decades and centuries together, which directly contributed to their economic development and human development. And we refer to these emissions of the developed countries as historical emissions. But developing countries have started burning fossil fuels more recently, and due to their low degree of economic and human development, their per capita emissions happen to be very low. And it would be unfair to expect the same climate action from them because these developing countries and underdeveloped nations, they are not accountable for any historical emissions. And moreover, they deserve to exploit their carbon budget in order to develop their countries and their societies. It is this argument that places developing nations like India in direct conflict with developed nations such as the United States. Ever since the climate change negotiation began in the 1990s, India and several other developing nations have always insisted that the developed world should be held accountable for their historical emissions, and hence they have championed the principle of CBDR, which stands for Common but Differentiated Responsibilities. It means that the developing nations acknowledge that fighting climate change is a common goal for every developing and developed nation, but it need not be the same extent of responsibilities that they will have to take up. Instead, they should take up differentiated responsibilities based upon their respective historical emissions. So, fulfilling these historical responsibilities are the responsibilities of the developed nations, and the principle of CBDR was inculcated into the Kyoto Protocol of the Climate Change Convention. The Paris Agreement, on the other hand, diluted the CBDR principle, but despite that, it does talk about common but differentiated responsibilities, and it does highlight the principle of equity as seen under the provisions of Article 4.1. So now, the special report of the IPCC, or the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, has shown that the world is left with a carbon budget of around 480 gigatons or billion tons of carbon dioxide equivalent. At the current rate of emissions of about 42 gigatons carbon dioxide equivalent per year, this remaining carbon budget will be consumed by the world in the next 12 years. Basically, this is the carbon space that is available for all the countries, after which climate change will more or less become irreversible. So the Paris Agreement is trying to achieve this target to keep the world within this carbon budget. But the writers point out that all scientific evidence available indicates that the world is highly unlikely to achieve this target, and the developed countries are just trying to hide from their historical responsibilities by trying to push the world towards carbon neutrality within a specified deadline. According to the writers, this is unfair and hypocritical of the developed countries because, see, the United States achieved its emissions peak back in 2005 itself, and since then, its emissions are on the decline. But despite that, it still has one of the world's highest per capita emissions. And between 2018 and 2050, US alone would be consuming 106 gigatons of carbon dioxide equivalent, which is around 22% of the remaining carbon budget. So even if these countries push themselves towards carbon neutrality, it still doesn't take away the fact that they continue to be the largest polluters and they're trying to escape from their historical responsibilities. At these rate of emissions, the US will have to achieve carbon neutrality by 2025 to stay well within the carbon budget. But the US is pushing for carbon neutrality in its economy by 2050. So this, the writers calculate, creates a carbon debt for the US. And if it has to be held accountable for historical emissions and for over-consuming the global carbon budget, then the US owes $14 trillion to the developing and the underdeveloped nations. The same applies for the European countries as well, because under their ambitious carbon neutrality plans, European countries are planning to achieve carbon neutrality by roughly around 2050. But at the current rate of emissions, they will consume 71 gigatons of carbon dioxide equivalent out of the carbon budget. And in that case, their carbon neutrality target should be 2033 and not 2050. So this excess period of emissions also creates a carbon debt for the European countries. And based on their historical responsibilities, they owe the world $9.3 trillion. Since these countries are unlikely to pay this carbon debt, and since they're already developed nations with high levels of human development indices, it is an imperative for developing nations like India to protect their carbon space and to protect their developmental priorities. See, even though India is one of the largest emitter of greenhouse gases, its overall carbon footprint still happens to be extremely low. For several decades, this low carbon footprint of India was a direct consequence of its utter poverty and deprivation. But as the country started to progress and as it witnessed exponential economic growth, India's overall emissions have definitely increased, but still it is very low on per capita terms as compared to the emissions of the developed nations. See, India's emissions prior to the 1990s hardly accounts for 3.5% of the global emissions. And even if you calculate till 2018, India's contribution to global emissions stands at just 5%. Even if you take into account India's future development and the increase in India's emissions, it will still account for a small percentage of the global emissions. And moreover, India does not owe any carbon debt to other countries. Rather, India deserves to enjoy the remaining carbon space, and countries like India should be given more space to exploit the remaining carbon budget. Right now, there is a lot of pressure on India to declare similar targets, such as the developed nations with regard to carbon neutrality. And developed countries and even the global civil society is pressurizing the Indian government to specify a target year just like them, by which India would try to achieve carbon neutrality in its economy. The writers argue that India will have to resist such pressure and strongly defend its carbon space by keeping in mind its immediate socio-economic needs and developmental aspirations. Now let's take up a column from page number 7 in which the writers evaluate the efficiency of Lok Adalats. See, the Lok Adalat is a type of alternative dispute resolution mechanism that has been championed in the Indian judicial system in order to speed up the delivery of justice. As we know, the Indian judiciary, especially at the lower courts, happens to be very slow in disposing of cases, and there is a huge backlog of cases at all the three tiers of the judiciary, be it the lower courts, the high courts, or the Supreme Court. There is a huge pendency of cases at all the three tiers of judiciary, and as the popular phrase goes, justice delayed is justice denied. So, to speed up the judicial process and to reduce the burden on the judiciary and to deliver timely justice to the common people, the Lok Adalat system was introduced as an alternative dispute resolution mechanism. See, around the world, various ADR mechanisms have been accepted, such as arbitration, mediation, conciliation, etc., and have been implemented in India as well through the Arbitration and Conciliation Act. But however, the Lok Adalat system is a unique Indian innovation that is rooted in the historical practice of resolving disputes at the local levels involving the heads and the elders of the village through the institution of the village panchayats. Back in 1949, a disciple of Mahatma Gandhi, Hari Vallabh Parekh, introduced the concept of Lok Adalats around Gujarat in order to provide for the speedier resolution of disputes amongst the local people. But this system of Lok Adalat was informal with no legal recognition. But later, Lok Adalats have been institutionalized in line with the principles of the Indian Constitution in order to provide for the speedy disposal of cases. See, Article 39A mandates the state to ensure equal justice and provide free legal aid for all. In this spirit, the Legal Services Authorities Act of 1987 was enacted that led to the establishment of the National Legal Services Authority or NALSA and the State Legal Services Authorities at the state level. Under these legal services authorities, the Lok Adalat institution has been given a formal structure and recognition, and both at the state and the national level, these Lok Adalats are often held by the respective legal services authorities, and in a single day, lakhs of cases are disposed, thereby ensuring speedy justice to the litigants. See, the very foundation of the Lok Adalat system is built on compromise. In fact, all mechanisms of alternate dispute resolution, they are built on the foundation of compromise between the litigants. This compromise is mediated through the Lok Adalat system, where the legal services authorities provide the required legal aid to the litigants, and as per established procedure, they try to achieve a compromise and a mediated settlement in order to resolve the dispute. At such Lok Adalats, dispute resolution happens to be very quick because these proceedings are not bound by the strict application of procedural laws such as the Code of Civil Procedure, the Indian Evidence Act, the Indian Penal Code, etc. So, since they don't have to strictly adhere to the laws, they can work out an effective out of court settlement, and such dispute resolution happens to be a low cost and speedier alternative for all the litigants. And the final solution that is worked out under the Lok Adalat has the same status as that of the orders of a civil court, thereby making it enforceable. And this was seen as a panacea to speed up the judicial process in the country and to reduce the backlog of cases in the higher judiciary. The data that is made available by the legal services authorities shows that whenever these Lok Adalats are held at the state level or at the national level, in a single day, lakhs of cases are disposed, thereby proving that these Lok Adalats are very efficient when it comes to the speed at which justice is being delivered. So there is no doubt about the ability of Lok Adalats in reducing the burden on the judiciary and in clearing the pendency of cases. But however, the writers raise a crucial question over the quality of justice that is being delivered through Lok Adalats. Because according to them, in the name of speedy justice, quality justice is being compromised, thereby defeating the objective of fairness, which is supposed to be crucial in any judicial process. So the writers say that justice hurried is justice buried, and the judiciary and the state shouldn't allow speed to override quality, and the judicial system needs to look beyond the need for speedy justice and ensure that the focus remains on just and fair outcomes. Because in many cases, the litigants might be unequal or asymmetrical as far as their money, power, and influence is concerned. Now, take for example a case involving a poor individual against a large company or a large corporation. When such cases are brought to Lok Adalats, the corporations are bound to leverage their power to exert pressure on the poor individual and push him towards a compromise. Because see, at Lok Adalats, several cases are taken up related to motor accident claims, disputes related to public utility services, cases related to dishonesty, fraud, checks, and disputes related to check bounces, and even disputes related to land, labor, matrimonial disputes, etc. In all such cases, one litigant or one party might be more powerful than the other, and in such a case, the compromise is likely to favor the powerful. For example, an affected individual may not receive the right compensation from a large corporation. Take, for example, how the victims of Bhopal gas tragedy are still struggling for adequate compensation, and this clearly represents a complete derailment of justice. Similarly, when matrimonial cases are being handled by Lok Adalats, usually women, especially poor women, they are given moral lessons in the name of a compromise under the romanticized idea of marriage, where the woman has to contribute more. And even in Lok Adalats, women are pushed to compromise more with regard to such matrimonial disputes. It is in this context that we need to remember the ruling of the Supreme Court in the state of Punjab versus Jalor Singh case of 2008. In this ruling, the Supreme Court had held that Lok Adalat is purely conciliatory in nature and it has no adjudicatory function or judicial function. Since compromise is the very central foundational idea of Lok Adalat, there is a valid concern that in the hurry to achieve speedy justice, fair justice or equitable justice might be compromised, which undermines the very idea of justice. So it is on these grounds that the writers are calling upon the judiciary and even the government to prioritize the quality of justice that is being delivered through Lok Adalats by reducing the obsessive focus on the speed of justice through the Lok Adalat system. Now let's take up an article from page number 10 that deals with India's relations with Seychelles. See, Seychelles is an island nation and it is made up of an archipelago of islands and it occupies a strategic location in the Indian Ocean region. Seychelles is located along the east coast of Africa near the Horn of Africa region and it is located in the western part of the Indian Ocean. This strategic location of Seychelles makes it a very important country for India and it receives the highest priority under India's Sagar doctrine. Sagar stands for security and growth for all in the region And this was India's exclusive diplomatic doctrine that was brought out by Prime Minister Modi in 2015 to provide special focus to key island nations in the Indian Ocean region. India shares a historical and cultural connection with Seychelles dating back to the colonial days. And even today, a strong Indian connection can be found in Seychelles, and close to 11% of its population is of Indian descent. Especially traders, businessmen, and workers from Gujarat and Tamil Nadu have settled in Seychelles from years together, and this signifies the strength of people to people relations between India and Seychelles. Seychelles, being a very small country located in a vulnerable region, it faces a very high degree of maritime security risk from both pirates and as well as terrorists who are known to operate in the region. Hence, to ensure the stability of this small island nation, India plays a key role in the defense of Seychelles. And the Indian and Seychelles Defense Forces not only conduct joint exercises known as L'Amitié, but India is also a key provider of defense equipment to Seychelles. Over the years, India has donated helicopters, surveillance aircrafts, and naval vessels to help Seychelles defend and carry out patrolling and surveillance in its exclusive economic zone so that its maritime security can be strengthened and the stability of this key island nation can be ensured in the Indian Ocean. India has even brought Seychelles on board its coastal surveillance radar project, and India has already installed a series of coastal surveillance radars on Seychelles. And these radars are further interlinked with the coastal surveillance radars on Indian mainland. And all this radar data from across a chain of Indian built radars, including from Mauritius, is collated into regional headquarters and to a final national headquarter located at Gurugram, which is known as the Information Fusion Center for the Indian Ocean region. At this headquarters of the Coastal Surveillance Radar Project, the Indian Navy gets to have a real-time picture of all the shipping traffic in the Indian Ocean, and India has even offered this project to other countries such as Sri Lanka and Maldives. So Seychelles is already a part of this project, and in 2015, when Prime Minister Modi carried out a historic visit to Seychelles, he inaugurated these coastal surveillance radars. Even in the economic domain, India and Seychelles share a very close relationship because Seychelles, being a small country, its economy is not well diversified and it is heavily dependent on tourism and fishing. So in every other sector, it is India which helps out Seychelles, and India happens to be a key trading partner for the country. These close defense and economic relations have led to the elevation of strategic ties between India and Seychelles. And during the Prime Minister's visit in 2015, Seychelles had agreed to lease its strategic Assumption Island to India, where India is looking to create transport and logistics infrastructure, including the building of runways and ports. And this has led strategic experts to conclude that India might be looking to turn the Assumption Island into a possible military base for the Indian Armed Forces. Even though the Assumption Island project has run into a controversy in Seychelles, India is still very much interested in the project, and this goes on to highlight the strategic relations between the two nations. Even during the pandemic, India reached out to Seychelles under its Mission Sagar and supplied essential medicines and items to several countries in the Indian Ocean, including Seychelles. Now, under the Vaccine Maitri initiative, India has already dispatched around 50,000 doses of vaccine, and Seychelles was one of the first countries to receive the India-made vaccine. So this clearly explains the broad-based relations between India and Seychelles, and this is what makes this article important. According to this article, India and Seychelles will be having a virtual meet, and the Indian Prime Minister would be donating a naval vessel known as PS Zoroaster, which is a fast patrol vessel that has been built by the Kolkata headquartered defense manufacturer GRSE, or the Garden Reach Shipbuilders and Engineering Limited. This fast patrol boat, being gifted by India, can be used for anti-piracy operations by the Coast Guard of Seychelles. Along with this, India has built a 1 megawatt solar power plant and a magistrate's court building on an island known as Mahé, which happens to be the largest island of Seychelles. These Indian-built projects will also be inaugurated during the virtual interaction between Indian Prime Minister and the recently elected President of Seychelles, Mr. Wawill Ram Kalawan. Next, on page number 6, we have a column related to abortion and the Medical Termination of Pregnancy Act. But this topic has been discussed in complete detail in our yesterday's analysis, so kindly go back and watch the video and go through this column once. Next, on the same page, we have an editorial related to the Monetary Policy Committee's decision to retain the key policy rate, that is the repo rate, at 4% in order to adopt an accommodative stance towards promoting growth while balancing inflation. On the 3rd of April, I have explained the policy priorities of the Monetary Policy Committee in complete detail. So you can revise from the video once and then go through the editorial for further clarity. Now let's look at the mains practice questions. The first question: as the developed countries are pushing the world towards carbon neutrality, India should not join this game as it has to stay focused on development as its immediate need and aspirational goal. Critically evaluate. The second question: the Lok Adalat system must look beyond swift disposal of cases and focus on just and fair outcomes. Discuss. Kindly write an answer to these questions and post your answers in the comment section below. This concludes our discussion for today. Thanks for watching.